The metal doors of the docking bay hissed open with a sound like angry snakes. Steam rolled out from the gap, carrying the smell of oil and recycled air. Through the mist stepped a figure that made the station workers freeze in their tracks, Zektar. The Merciless stood 7 feet tall, his green-scaled skin catching the harsh lights of the orbital station. His yellow eyes swept across the busy platform, searching for any sign of trouble. The reptilian bounty hunter had not earned his reputation by being careless. 2 curved horns jutted from his skull, and his clawed hands rested on the twin plasma. Pistols at his sides, the workers gave him a wide path as he walked toward the station's main hub. They knew his kind Vorthek hunters were feared across the galaxy for their skill and their complete lack of mercy. Most bounty hunters would bring their targets back alive if possible. Zektar had never bothered with such kindness, but today was different. Today, Zektar was not hunting for money or reputation. He was hunting for revenge. 5 years had passed since the incident on Kepler 442b. 5 long years, since a human named Jake Sullivan had destroyed everything Zektar had worked to build. The memory still burned in his mind like acid. He had been so close to capturing the human thief, so close to claiming the massive bounty on Sullivan's head. The chase had started simple enough. Sullivan had been accused of stealing medical supplies from a corporate transport convoy. The crime was serious, but routine for a hunter of Zektar's skill. He had tracked the human to the mining world of Kepler 442b, cornered him in an abandoned facility, and prepared to make an easy capture. But humans never made anything easy. Sullivan had somehow turned the tables on him. The human had used the mining equipment against him, bringing down half the facility and trapping Zektar under tons of debris. When the hunter finally freed himself, his ship was destroyed, his reputation ruined, and Sullivan was gone. The other hunters had laughed at him. Zektar the Merciless, brought low by a single human. The job stopped coming. The fear in his enemy's eyes was replaced by mockery. He had been forced to take smaller and smaller contracts, barely earning enough credits to survive, but Zektar had not given up. He had spent 5 years planning, saving, and tracking. He had finally gathered enough money to buy a new ship and enough information to find his target. The trail had led him here, to the orbital station above Earth, humanity's homeworld. The station administrator's office was located in the upper levels, away from the noise and chaos of the docking bays. Zektar found the nervous Centaurian hunched over a holographic display, his forearms moving quickly over the controls. The alien looked up as the hunter entered, his large black eyes widening in recognition. "Zektar the Merciless," Vilok said, his voice shaking slightly. "I was not expecting you." "I need information," Zektar growled, his voice like grinding stone. "About a human named Jake Sullivan." Vilok's hands stopped moving. He stared at the hunter for a long moment before speaking. "Sullivan? That name is familiar. Let me check the records." The Centaurian's fingers danced over the controls, bringing up file after file. After several minutes, he stopped and looked up at Zektar with something like pity in his eyes. "I found him," Vilok said quietly. "But you will not like what I have to tell you. Tell me." Jake Sullivan was tried and convicted of the theft charges you mentioned. But instead of prison, he was sentenced to exile. He was sent to Cairo 5 years ago. Zektar felt his blood run cold. Cairo 7 was known throughout the galaxy as a death sentence. It was a planet where the Galactic Council sent criminals they wanted to disappear forever. No one had ever returned from Cairo 7 alive. "Are you certain?" Zektar asked. "Completely. The records are clear." Sullivan was transported to Cairo 7 aboard the prison ship Judgment. He has been there ever since. Zektar turned to leave, but Vilok called out to him. "Wait, there is something else, something strange." The hunter stopped and looked back at the administrator. "Recent sensor sweeps of the planet have detected human life signs. Someone is still alive down there?" Zektar's eyes narrowed. "How many?" "The readings are unclear, but at least one, possibly more." "For the first time in 5 years?" Zektar smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Prepare a supply manifest for a hunting expedition to Cairo 7, he ordered. Velok stood up so quickly he knocked over his chair. You cannot be serious. Cairo 7 is a death world. The gravity is 3 times standard. The atmosphere is toxic. The native life forms are beyond dangerous. Nothing survives there. Something has survived, Zektar said. And I intend to find it. The storms alone will tear your ship apart. The acid rain will dissolve your equipment. The predators are the size of starships. Even the plants are carnivorous. Zektar walked to the window that looked out over the planet Earth below. Somewhere on the surface, humans went about their daily lives, unaware that one of their kind had managed to survive in hell itself. I have been tracking Sullivan for 5 years, he said without turning around. I have followed every lead, checked every record, spoken to every contact. This is the first real proof that he is still alive. But why? Velok asked. What could be worth risking your life on that cursed world? Zektar turned back to face the administrator. His yellow eyes burned with a hatred that had grown stronger with each passing year. 5 years ago, that human destroyed my life. My ship, my reputation, my career, everything I had built over decades of hunting. The other bounty hunters mock me. They call me the hunter who was beaten by a human. He walked closer to Velok, who backed away until he hit the wall. I will not rest until I have my revenge. I will follow Sullivan into the depths of hell itself if necessary. And when I find him, I will make him pay for every moment of suffering he has caused me. Velok swallowed hard. I will prepare the supplies you need. Good, I leave in 1 hour. As Zektar walked out of the office, Velok whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening. He had a feeling that the hunter was walking into something far more dangerous than he could imagine below them. The planet Cairo 7 hung in space like a green and brown wound against the stars. Its surface was hidden by thick clouds that swirled with unnatural colors. Lightning flashed constantly in the upper atmosphere, and the sensor readings showed temperatures and pressures that would kill most known life forms. But somewhere on that hostile world, Jake Sullivan was waiting, and Zektar the Merciless was coming for him. The morning sun on Cairo 7 was not yellow like Earth's sun. It was a sickly green that cast strange shadows through the thick jungle canopy. The light filtered down through leaves that dripped with acid and vines that moved without wind. In this alien dawn, Jake Sullivan was already awake and moving. He crouched at the edge of a cliff, watching the valley below through eyes that no longer looked entirely human. 5 years on this death world had changed him in ways that went deeper than scars. His pupils were larger now, adapted to see in the dim light that penetrated the toxic atmosphere. His skin had a grayish tint from exposure to the poisonous air, and strange markings covered his arms, where symbiotic organisms had made their home. Jake moved with the fluid grace of a predator. Each step was calculated, silent, perfect. The crushing gravity that would have broken most beings had become his ally. His bones were denser now, reinforced with grafts from the planet's native creatures. His muscles had adapted to carry 3 times the weight they were designed for. Below him, a pack of void stalkers moved through the trees. These creatures were the size of Earth elephants, but they could phase in and out of normal space. Their ghostly forms flickered between solid and transparent as they hunted. Most species in the galaxy classified them as extinction-level threats. Jake had learned to hunt them for breakfast. He reached for the weapon at his side, but it was not the kind of gun that civilized worlds would recognize. It was built from salvaged parts of a dozen different ships, powered by a fusion cell he had taken from a crashed transport, and loaded with ammunition he had crafted from the planet's native materials. The bullets were tipped with venom from the acid wasps that nested in the upper canopy. Jake took aim at the largest void stalker and fired. The creature dropped instantly, its pack scattering into the dimension between dimensions. He would collect the body later. The meat would feed him for days, and the hide would make excellent armor. He stood and began the journey back to his base. The path took him through terrain that would have been impossible for any normal human to navigate. He swung from vines that would have dissolved human flesh, walked across streams of liquid that ate through metal, and climbed rock faces that crumbled at the touch, but Jake was no longer normal. The neural implants in his skull, salvaged from a crashed AI ship, allowed him to process information at superhuman speeds. He could calculate the exact trajectory needed to swing from branch to branch, the precise pressure required to climb, the unstable rocks, the exact moment when the acid streams would be safe to cross. His base was hidden in a cliff face that overlooked the most dangerous part of the jungle. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than a crack in the rock. But behind the concealed entrance lay a marvel of improvised engineering that would have impressed the galaxy's best scientists. The main chamber was carved from the living rock using tools Jake had built from salvaged mining equipment. The walls were lined with a substance he had harvested from the shell of a creature called a stone borer. It was harder than most metals and completely resistant to the planet's acid rain. Power came from a geothermal tap he had drilled deep into the planet's core. The heat was channeled through a system of pipes, made from the bones of creatures that thrived in the planet's volcanic regions. The energy output was more than enough to run all his equipment and keep the base warm during the brutal nights. Water was collected from the atmosphere using a filtration system he had designed himself. The filters were made from the organs of creatures that could process the planet's toxic air. Each drop of water was purified through 17 different stages before it was safe to drink. Food storage was handled by a preservation system that used the same biological processes that kept the planet's scavenger species alive. Jake had learned to think like the planet itself, to use its own methods against it, but the most impressive part of his base was the workshop. Here, Jake had built equipment that would have been impossible on any civilized world. He had learned to work with materials that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. Metals that changed their properties based on temperature, crystals that could store massive amounts of energy, and organic compounds that could be programmed like computer code. His body bore the results of his work. The chitinous plates that covered his shoulders and back were grown from symbiotic organisms he had cultivated in his lab. They were stronger than most armor and completely integrated with his nervous system. The bioluminescent patches on his arms and chest were bacteria that he had modified to provide light and help him navigate in complete darkness. Jake walked to a bank of monitors that showed him everything happening within 50 miles of his base. The screens were built from salvaged ship components, but the sensors were his own creation. They could detect movement, heat signatures, electrical activity, and even dimensional disturbances like those created by the Void Stalkers. One screen showed something that made him pause. A ship was entering the planet's atmosphere. It was small, heavily armed, and heading straight for the jungle valley where he had first been dropped 5 years ago. Jake studied the ship's design and smiled. It was a Vorthak hunter vessel. He knew exactly who was piloting it. "Zektar," he said aloud, his voice carrying harmonics that had not been there 5 years ago. The atmospheric adaptation had changed his vocal cords, giving his words an almost musical quality that somehow made them more threatening. He had been wondering when the bounty hunter would finally track him down. Part of him had even hoped for it. Life on Cairo 7 was challenging, but it had become routine. The planet's dangers no longer surprised him. He had adapted to everything it could throw at him, but a visitor from his past. That was something new. Jake walked to a cabinet and pulled out a device that looked like a cross between a compass and a weapon. It was a motion tracker he had built from the nervous system of a creature that could sense movement across vast distances. The readings showed Zektar's ship landing in the valley, exactly where Jake had expected. He could kill the hunter easily. A single shot from his rifle would end the threat before it began, or he could trigger one of the many traps he had built throughout the jungle. The planet itself would do the work for him, but that would be too simple, too quick. After 5 years of solitude, Jake found himself curious about his former captor. How much had Zektar changed? How had he tracked him here? And most importantly, how long would he last against the planet that had forged Jake into something beyond human? Jake began to prepare, Not for battle, but for a game. He would let Zektar hunt him, but on his terms. The hunter would learn what it meant to be prey on a world where everything was designed to kill. He activated a series of sensors throughout the jungle and began to plot the hunter's most likely routes. Then he started to set up the obstacles. That would guide his enemy exactly where he wanted him to go. The transformation was complete. Jake Sullivan, the desperate thief who had been dropped on this world to die, no longer existed. In his place was something new, something that understood the galaxy's most important truth. The strong survived by becoming stronger, and the weak died by staying weak. Zektar the Merciless was about to learn which category he belonged to. Zektar's ship touched down in what looked like a safe clearing surrounded by tall trees. The landing sensors showed solid ground, no immediate threats, and breathable atmosphere within his suit's filters. But the moment he stepped out of his vessel, everything went wrong. The ground beneath his feet was not solid dirt. It was a thin layer of organic matter covering something that moved. As soon as his weight settled on it, the surface began to crack and split. Through the gaps he could see pale, writhing things that looked like worms but were the size of his arm. The hunter jumped back toward his ship, but the movement triggered something else. The trees around the clearing began to pulse with a sickly light, and the air filled with a high-pitched whining sound that hurt his ears even through his helmet. Within seconds, the clearing was no longer empty. Creatures began to emerge from the ground, from the trees, and from dimensions that existed somewhere between reality and nightmare. They were called Void Stalkers by the galactic databases, but seeing them in person was nothing like reading about them in a file. Each creature was the size of a small transport ship, with 6 legs that ended in claws that could cut through metal. Their bodies flickered between solid and transparent, making them nearly impossible to target. When they moved, they seemed to exist in several places at once, their forms shifting like smoke. Zektar drew his plasma pistols and began firing. The energy bolts passed through the creatures when they were in their ghostly state, but struck home when they solidified. The first stalker dropped with a shriek that sounded like tearing metal, but 3 more took its place. The hunter ran for higher ground, using his suit's jump jets to leap over the writhing ground cover. Behind him, the Void Stalkers gave chase, their forms flickering in and out of existence as they moved through the jungle. Trees exploded into splinters as the creatures passed through them, and the air itself seemed to bend around their bodies. Zektar found a rocky outcrop and took cover behind a boulder. His suit's sensors were going crazy, detecting energy signatures that should not exist and movement patterns that defied physics. He had fought dangerous creatures before, but nothing like this. Scanning for weakness, he muttered, activating his suit's analysis systems. The readings made no sense. The creatures seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially in something else. Their biology was impossible by any known science. He fired again, this time using explosive rounds instead of plasma. The detonations scattered the pack, but they regrouped within seconds. Worse, the explosions seemed to attract more creatures. Through the jungle canopy, he could see other shapes moving toward his position. The hunter began to move again, leaping from rock to rock as he tried to find a more defensible position. But each place he stopped became a trap. The rocks crumbled under his weight, revealing that they were not rocks at all, but some kind of sleeping creature. The vines he grabbed for support tried to wrap around his arms and pull him into the canopy. Even the air seemed to be against him, growing thicker and more toxic with each breath. By the time he reached what looked like a safe cave, Zektar was beginning to understand that this was not a normal hunt. The planet itself was hunting him. The cave entrance was wide enough for his ship, but he had left it back in the clearing with the Void Stalkers. He would have to retrieve it later, assuming he survived the next few hours. The hunter activated his suit's lights and moved into the darkness. The cave was not empty. Strange markings covered the walls, carved deep into the stone. They were not made by any tool he recognized. They looked like claw marks, but arranged in patterns that suggested intelligence. Words in a language he did not know, but there was one marking he did recognize. Burned into the stone near the cave entrance was a simple message in standard galactic script: "Welcome home." Zektar felt his blood run cold. The message was recent, the edges of the burn marks still sharp. Someone had known he was coming. Someone had been watching. He moved deeper into the cave, following a tunnel that led down into the planet's crust. The walls here were covered with different markings, images of creatures that looked like nothing in the galactic databases, diagrams that might have been maps or might have been warnings, and everywhere more messages in standard script. "Ready for round 2? Read 1. You took your time," said another. "The real hunt starts now." Each message was signed with the same symbol, a crude drawing of a human skull with crossbones. But the skull had been modified, given features that were not quite human. The eye sockets were too large, the teeth too sharp, the bone structure too dense. Zektar stopped walking. He had seen that symbol before, 5 years ago on Kepler 442b. It had been carved into the wall of the mining facility where he had first encountered Jake Sullivan. At the time, he had thought it was just graffiti. Now he realized it was a signature. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber. The hunter's lights revealed a space that was partly natural cave and partly something else. The walls had been carved and shaped by intelligent hands, but the work was crude and brutal. This was not the refined architecture of a civilized species. This was the work of someone who had learned to build using nothing but determination and raw materials. Strange equipment filled the chamber. Devices that looked like weapons but were built from salvaged parts and organic materials. Monitors and computers that hummed with power from unknown sources. And everywhere the bones and shells of creatures that must have been the size of small buildings. In the center of the chamber stood a chair made from the skull of something enormous. Sitting in it was a figure that might once have been human. Jake Sullivan had changed. His skin was gray and marked with patterns that seemed to shift in the light. His eyes were larger than they should be, and they glowed with a pale fire. His hair was gone, replaced by something that looked like living metal. His hands ended in claws that were part bone and part machinery, but it was his smile that made Zektar take a step backward. It was the smile of something that had learned to enjoy pain, both giving it and receiving it. "You made it," Jake said, his voice carrying harmonics that hurt to hear. "I was starting to think you had given up." Zektar raised his weapons, but Jake held up a hand. "Wait, before we start, I want to show you something. I want you to understand what you are dealing with." Jake stood and walked to a wall covered with monitors. The screens showed views of the jungle from dozens of different angles. On every screen, creatures moved through the darkness. Void stalkers, acid wasps, stone borers, and things that had no names. All of them were heading toward the cave. "I did not call them," Jake said, still smiling. "They came because they smell your fear. This planet feeds on fear, Zektar, and you are afraid." The hunter's grip tightened on his weapons. "I am not afraid of you, human." "No," Jake agreed. "You are not afraid of me. You are afraid of what I have become. You are afraid of what this planet has taught me. You are afraid because you finally understand that you are not the hunter anymore." Jake's smile widened, showing teeth that were too sharp and too many. "You are the prey?" Outside the cave, the creatures began to howl. The sound echoed through the tunnels, growing louder and more horrible with each passing second. And in the darkness, something much worse than any creature began to move. The real hunt was about to begin. Jake stood in the center of his underground chamber, no longer trying to hide what he had become. The transformation was complete, and for the first time in 5 years he had someone to show it to. His body moved with fluid grace despite the crushing gravity that would have broken most beings. Every motion was calculated, perfect, deadly. 5 years, Jake said, his voice carrying sounds that human throats were not meant to make. 5 years since you dropped me on this world to die. Do you know what I learned in that time? Zektar kept his weapons trained on the transformed human, but his hands were shaking. The creature before him bore little resemblance to the desperate thief he had chased through the mining facility. This was something else entirely. I learned that the galaxy has been lying to itself, Jake continued, walking slowly around the chamber. All those civilized worlds, all those comfortable species, they think they know what survival means, but they have never been tested, not really. Jake gestured to the walls around them, covered with trophies from creatures that could destroy armies. Claws the size of swords, teeth that could bite through starship hulls, and shells that had once protected beings larger than buildings. This planet taught me what it really means to be human. Not the soft, civilized version that trades and talks and makes deals, the real version. The version that your species fears in their nightmares. The hunter's finger tightened on his trigger. You are just another human, flesh and blood like any other. Jake laughed, and the sound made the equipment in the chamber vibrate. Am I? Look at me, Zektar, really look. Jake held up his hands, showing claws that were part bone and part metal. The chitinous plates covering his arms shifted and moved like living armor. His eyes glowed with bioluminescent bacteria that had been modified to see in spectrums that did not exist on normal worlds. This is what happens when you take a human and strip away everything soft, when you force them to adapt or die, when you make them choose between becoming stronger or becoming food. Jake walked to a workbench covered with devices that looked like they had been built by someone who understood both technology and biology at levels that should have been impossible. He picked up something that might have been a weapon or might have been a medical instrument. I spent the first year just trying to survive. The air was poison, the water was acid, the gravity was crushing me. Every creature on this planet was designed to kill things like me. By all rights, I should have died in the first week. He turned the device over in his hands, studying it with eyes that processed information faster than any organic brain should have been able to, but I did not die. I adapted. I learned to breathe the poison air by changing my lungs. I learned to drink the acid water by rebuilding my stomach. I learned to move in the crushing gravity by making my bones stronger and my muscles denser. Zektar watched in horror as Jake's body began to change even as he spoke. The chitinous plates spread across more of his skin, his muscles visibly grew larger, and his teeth became sharper. The neural implants came from a crashed AI ship. I took them apart and rebuilt them to work with human biology. Now I can process information at speeds that would burn out a computer. I can calculate trajectories, predict movements, and analyze weaknesses faster than you can blink. Jake's eyes began to glow brighter, and Zektar could see data streaming across them like a computer display. The symbiotic organisms came from the native life forms. I learned to cultivate them, to modify them, to make them part of myself. They provide armor, weapons, sensors, and power. I am no longer just human. I am human plus everything this world has to offer. Jake set down the device and picked up something else. It looked like a simple piece of metal, but when he held it, it began to glow and reshape itself. But the most important thing I learned was not about technology or biology. It was about psychology, about what it means to be a predator on a world where everything is prey. He walked closer to Zektar, who raised his weapons but did not fire. Something in Jake's manner suggested that shooting would be a very bad idea. I learned that fear is a tool, that pain is a teacher, that death is just another problem to solve. I learned that the difference between predator and prey is not strength or speed or weapons, it is mindset. Jake stopped just outside the range of Zektar's weapons. His transformed features were almost impossible to read, but his intent was clear. You came here for revenge, Hunter. You wanted to make me pay for what I did to you 5 years ago, but you are thinking like prey. You are thinking like someone who believes that problems can be solved by violence. Jake's smile widened, showing teeth that were designed for tearing. I am thinking like someone who has learned that violence is just the beginning. That real victory comes from understanding your enemy so completely that you can predict their every move. That true power comes from becoming something they cannot even comprehend. The hunter's suit sensors began to beep frantically. Something was happening in the chamber, something that his equipment could not identify. What are you doing? Zektar demanded. I am showing you what 5 years of evolution looks like, Jake replied. I am showing you what happens when a human stops pretending to be civilized. The air in the chamber began to change. It grew thicker, more toxic, harder to breathe even through Zektar's filters. The temperature dropped, and frost began to form on the walls. The gravity seemed to increase, pressing down on the hunter like a massive weight. "This is my world now," Jake said, his voice carrying easily through the hostile atmosphere. "I control the air, the temperature, the gravity, the very space around us. I have become part of this planet, and it has become part of me." Zektar's suit began to fail. Warning lights flashed as his life support system struggled to cope with the changing environment. His weapons felt heavier in his hands, and his movements became sluggish. "You wanted to hunt me," Jake continued. "But you cannot hunt something that has become the environment itself. You cannot fight something that controls the very air you breathe." The hunter tried to fire his weapons, but they would not respond. The changed atmosphere was interfering with their power systems. He tried to run, but his legs felt like they were made of lead. "I could kill you now," Jake said, walking closer. "It would be easy, but that would be wasteful. You came all this way to find me? You spent 5 years tracking me down. You deserve to understand what you have found." Jake reached out with one clawed hand and touched Zektar's helmet. The hunter's suit systems immediately began to shut down. One by one, "You found something that the galaxy has never seen before. A human who has learned to embrace what he really is. A predator who has stopped pretending to be prey. A survivor who has become something beyond survival. The last of Zektar's systems failed, and he collapsed to his knees. But Jake was not done talking. "You found the future," Jake said, his voice now the only sound in the chamber. "You found what humanity becomes when it stops trying to fit in with the rest of the galaxy. When it stops apologizing for being what it is." Jake leaned down until his glowing eyes were level with Zektar's failing vision. "You found your replacement." The chamber fell silent except for the sound of the hunter's labored breathing. In the darkness, something much worse than death was preparing to begin. Zektar lay on the cold stone floor of the chamber, his suit systems dead and his body struggling against the hostile atmosphere that Jake controlled. He expected death to come quickly, but instead, Jake did something unexpected. He restored the air to something the hunter could breathe and helped him to his feet. "I am not going to kill you," Jake said, his transformed features showing something that might have been amusement. "Death would be too simple, too final. You came here to learn what happened to me, so I'm going to show you everything." Jake led the confused hunter through tunnels that branched off from the main chamber. The passages were carved from living rock and lit by bioluminescent organisms that Jake had cultivated. As they walked, Zektar began to see that the underground complex was much larger than he had imagined. "This is just one of my facilities," Jake explained, his voice echoing off the walls. "I have 17 others scattered across the planet. Each one is designed for a different purpose: research, manufacturing, storage, defense." They entered a room filled with growing tanks that contained creatures Zektar had never seen before. Some looked like improvements on the planet's native life forms. Others appeared to be entirely new species that had been designed from scratch. "Biological engineering," Jake said, tapping one of the tanks. "I learned to modify the planet's organisms to serve my needs. Food that provides perfect nutrition, tools that grow themselves, weapons that evolve to match their targets." In the next room, Jake showed him workshops where technology and biology had been merged in ways that violated every known principle of science. Computers made from living tissue, weapons that fed on their own ammunition, and armor that healed itself. "The galaxy thinks technology and biology are separate things," Jake explained, picking up a device that looked like it was breathing. "But they are wrong. Life is just another form of technology, and technology is just another form of life." But it was the third room that truly shocked Zektar. It contained other humans. There were 7 of them, all showing various stages of the same transformation that Jake had undergone. Some still looked mostly human, with only minor modifications. Others had changed so much that their original species was barely recognizable. All of them moved with the same deadly grace that Jake displayed. Meet my family, Jake said, gesturing to the transformed humans. Other exiles who found their way to this world. Criminals, rebels, outcasts who the galaxy wanted to disappear? Forever. A woman with skin that had been replaced by living metal stepped forward. Her eyes were the same glowing type as Jake's, but they burned with a different color. She spoke in a voice that sounded like music and machinery combined. "This is Lisa," Jake said. She was exiled for trying to expose corporate corruption on her homeworld. The acid rains gave her new skin. The electromagnetic storms gave her new senses. Now she can interface directly with any computer system in the galaxy. A man whose bones had been replaced with crystalline structures that glowed from within nodded to Zektar. His movements created small lights that danced around his body like fireflies. Danny was sent here for stealing from military supplies. Jake continued. The planet's pressure forges rebuilt his skeleton with living crystal. Now he can store and channel energy like a living battery. One by one, Jake introduced the other transformed humans. Each had been changed by the planet in different ways, but all shared the same deadly competence and inhuman grace. They had not just survived Karo 7, they had been reforged by it. We are not just individuals anymore, Jake explained. We are a collective. A new form of humanity that shares knowledge, abilities, and purpose. When one of us learns something, we all learn it. When one of us evolves, we all benefit. Jake led Zektar to a final room that contained something that made the hunter's blood run cold. It was a communication array, but not like any he had seen before. It was grown rather than built, with organic components that pulsed with their own internal light. We have been in contact with humans throughout the galaxy, Jake said, activating the system. Outcasts on frontier worlds, rebels in the outer systems, criminals in the prison colonies. We have been teaching them what we learned here. The screens came alive with images from dozens of different worlds. On each one, Zektar could see humans who were beginning to show the same types of modifications that Jake and his group displayed. They were adapting to their environments, learning to thrive in conditions that would kill normal beings. The galaxy made a mistake when it started exiling humans to death worlds, Jake continued. They thought they were getting rid of problems. Instead, they were creating laboratories. Places where humans could explore their true potential without the constraints of civilization. Lisa stepped forward and placed her metallic hand on the communication array. Information began to flow across the screens faster than any normal being could process. We have identified 47 worlds where humans are undergoing similar transformations, she said in her musical voice. Desert worlds where they have learned to survive without water. Ice worlds where they have adapted to temperatures that would freeze other species solid. Radiation worlds where they have developed immunity to energy that would cook normal beings. Danny's crystal bones began to glow brighter as he added his own information to the display. The transformations are accelerating, he said. Each generation of adapted humans is stronger, faster, and more capable than the last. We estimate that within 50 years, there will be humans who can survive in the vacuum of space itself. Jake smiled at Zektar's horrified expression. You see now why I could not simply kill you, he said. You need to understand what you have witnessed. You need to carry this knowledge back to the galaxy. The hunter found his voice at last. What are you planning? We are not planning anything, Jake replied. We are simply becoming what we were always meant to be. The galaxy has spent centuries trying to civilize humans, to make them fit into a system that was designed by and for weaker species. But civilization is just another environment, and humans adapt to any environment. Jake walked to a window that looked out over the transformed landscape of Cairo 7 in the distance. Structures were visible that had not been there when Zektar first landed. Cities were growing from the planet itself, built by beings who had learned to work with their environment rather than against it. The age of human Deathworlders is beginning, Jake said. Not as conquerors or destroyers, but as something the galaxy has never seen before. A species that can make any world a home, any challenge an opportunity, any hardship a source of strength. He turned back to Zektar with eyes that burned with the light of a new future. Your hunting days are over, Zektar, but your real job is just beginning. You are going to be our messenger. You are going to tell the galaxy what humanity is becoming. Outside the window, the transformed landscape of Kairos 7 pulsed with new life. And across the galaxy, on worlds that had been meant as prisons, humans were learning to become something that would change everything. The transformation was spreading, and there was no force in the galaxy that could stop it. Jake stood at the edge of his transformed world, looking up at the stars that had once seemed so distant and hostile. Behind him, the city that his collective had grown from the living rock of Kairos 7 pulsed with bioluminescent light. The structures, breathed with their own life, powered by the planet's core and protected by defenses that were part technology and part living organism, Zektar's ship sat in the center of the city's landing area, fully repaired and refueled by the humans who had learned to work with materials that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. The hunter himself stood nearby, no longer the confident predator who had arrived days ago. His encounter with the transformed humans had changed him in ways that went deeper than fear. You understand now, Jake said, his voice carrying harmonics. That seemed to come from the planet itself. What you witnessed here is not unique. It is happening on dozens of worlds across the galaxy. Jake activated a holographic display that showed the galaxy in 3 dimensions. Red dots marked the locations where humans had been exiled to Deathworlds. Blue dots showed where those humans had not only survived, but begun to thrive. The blue dots were spreading, connecting to each other in a network that spanned thousands of light years. Each world teaches us something different, Jake continued. The ice worlds teach us to survive without heat. The desert worlds teach us to live without water. The radiation worlds teach us to absorb energy that would kill other species. And the high-gravity worlds like this one teach us to become stronger than anyone thought possible. Lisa approached, her metallic skin reflecting the light from the hologram. Her voice carried the musical quality that all the transformed humans shared. We have established contact with human populations on 37 different death worlds. She said, each group has developed unique adaptations but all share the same fundamental change. They have stopped trying to survive and started learning to thrive. Danny's crystal bones glowed as he added his own information to the display. The transformations are not random, he explained. They follow patterns that suggest something deeper is happening. Humans are not just adapting to their environments. They are evolving into something that can adapt to any environment. Jake nodded, his transformed features showing something. That might have been pride. The galaxy has been asking the wrong question, he said. They have been wondering how to control humans, how to make them fit into existing systems, how to limit their expansion. But the real question is, what happens when humans stop trying to fit in? The hologram changed, showing projections of human expansion over the next century. The blue dots multiplied and spread, reaching into regions of space that other species considered uninhabitable. Worlds with crushing gravity, poisonous atmospheres, and deadly radiation became green dots representing successful human colonies. We are not planning to conquer the galaxy, Jake said, seeing the fear in Zektar's eyes. Conquest implies taking something from someone else. But there are thousands of worlds that no other species wants or can use. Worlds that are too dangerous, too hostile, too far from trade routes to be worth claiming. Jake gestured to the transformed landscape around them. Those worlds will become ours. Not through war or politics, but through simple biology. We will go where others cannot follow, survive where others cannot live, and thrive where others would die. Lisa's hand touched the communication array, and new images appeared on the display. They showed human settlements on worlds that looked like nightmares. Colonies built in the hearts of active volcanoes, cities floating in seas of liquid methane, and research stations orbiting black holes where the radiation would cook any normal being. The first generation of adapted humans is already establishing permanent settlements, Lisa said. Their children will be even more capable, And their children after that will be something that the galaxy has never seen before. Danny's crystals pulsed with stored energy as he continued the explanation. We estimate that within 200 years, there will be humans who can survive in the vacuum of space itself. Within 500 years, there may be humans who can exist in the coronas of stars or in the event horizons of black holes. Jake turned away from the display and looked directly at Zektar. This is why I could not simply kill you, he said. Someone needs to carry this message back to the galaxy. Someone needs to explain what humanity is becoming. The hunter found his voice, though it was shaky with the weight of what he had learned. What message? He asked. That the age of trying to contain humanity is over, Jake replied. That the galaxy needs to prepare for a future where humans exist everywhere, in every environment, under every condition. That the species they tried to exile and eliminate has become something that will outlive them all. Jake activated a final program on the communication array. The display showed a message being transmitted to human populations across the galaxy. It was written in a dozen different languages and broadcast on frequencies that would reach the most remote settlements. The message was simple: the laboratory is ready. Come home. Zektar watched in horror as the message spread across the galaxy, reaching humans on frontier worlds, in prison colonies, and in exile communities. Within hours, responses began to come back. Confirmation signals from humans who had been waiting for this moment, requests for coordinates, plans for travel to the transformed worlds. They will come, Jake said with certainty. The outcasts, the rebels, the ones who never fit into civilized society, they will come to worlds like this one, and they will be transformed just as we were. Jake walked to Zektar's ship and placed his hand on the hull. The metal began to change, growing stronger and more resilient. Systems that had been damaged by the planet's hostile environment were not just repaired but improved. Your ship will carry you safely back to civilized space, Jake said. It has been upgraded with some of our biotechnology. It will survive journeys that would destroy normal vessels. The hunter climbed into his ship but paused at the entrance. Why? He asked. Why are you letting me go? Why are you telling me all this? Jake's smile was no longer entirely human, but it carried a warmth that was unmistakably so. Because the galaxy deserves to know what it created when it tried to get rid of us, he said. Because fear of the unknown is worse than knowledge of the inevitable. And because someone needs to witness the birth of humanity's true age? As Zektar's ship lifted off from the transformed world, Jake stood watching until it disappeared into the green sky. Around him, his collective continued their work, growing their city, perfecting their adaptations, and preparing for the arrival of more humans who would join their transformation. In the depths of space, the ship carried its passenger toward a galaxy that was about to learn that its greatest fear had already become reality. Humanity was no longer asking for a place at the table. They were building their own tables in places where no other species could survive. The hunter had come for revenge, but he was leaving as a herald of humanity's new age. And in the transformed cities of 100 death worlds, humans were preparing to become something that would change the meaning of life itself. The future belonged to those who could adapt to anything. And humans had just proven that they could adapt to everything.